It was just another quiet evening, the kind where I could finally kick back and relax after a long, tiring day. The world outside felt distant, and all I wanted was to unwind, have dinner, and maybe watch a bit of TV before heading to bed. Life had become a routine, but at least it was predictable, and for that, I was thankful. I didn't ask for much. My family, my home, and my job, those were the things I worked hard for, the things I tried to cherish. But little did I know, everything was about to shatter in an instant. The phone rang. I glanced at the screen, not recognizing the number, but answered it anyway. There was something unsettling about the unknown number on my screen, but I shrugged it off as some telemarketer. But as soon as I said hello, a voice on the other end immediately sent a shockwave through my entire body. The voice was calm, almost clinical. "This is Mary's hospital. We have your son here in the ER, and we need you to come in immediately. He's in critical condition." The words didn't hit me right away. It took a second, maybe two, for the full weight of what I had just heard to sink in. Critical condition? My son? I could feel my heartbeat picking up speed, my breath growing shallow. My mind was racing in 1,000 different directions. What happened? How could this happen? Was it an accident? Did he get hurt? The hospital representative offered little more information, telling me they would explain everything when I got there, but I barely heard it. I didn't care about the details. I needed to get to the hospital, and I needed to get there now. I hung up the phone and was already on my feet, rushing toward the door. My mind was reeling, too overwhelmed with fear to make any sense of what had just been said. As I grabbed my keys and left the house, I remember thinking this wasn't real. It couldn't be. My son was supposed to be safe. He was supposed to be okay. This was just some mix-up, some misunderstanding. He was fine. I kept telling myself that, but the voice of the hospital staff echoed in my mind, each word digging deeper into my soul. Critical condition. That was a phrase no parent ever wants to hear about their child. I started the car and slammed the pedal to the floor, not caring about the speed or the other cars on the road. Nothing mattered in that moment except getting to the hospital as quickly as possible. Every light seemed to be against me as I made my way through the streets, red lights flashing like warnings. The world outside seemed so distant, so irrelevant. All I could think about was my son, alone, in pain, in a place I couldn't be. I could feel the panic tightening in my chest, choking me with every passing second. What happened? Was he conscious? Was he scared? I tried to push those thoughts away, telling myself he was probably fine. It was probably just a minor injury or something. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. Something was wrong. Something was terribly wrong. When I finally arrived at the hospital, I nearly ran to the entrance, my legs feeling heavy, like they were made of lead. The fluorescent lights inside the hospital hallways were harsh and cold, casting long shadows on the floor. I tried to focus, tried to steady myself, but my mind was spinning too fast. Nurses and doctors moved past me, some of them glancing at me curiously, but no one seemed to be in a hurry to explain anything. I felt lost, like I was floating outside my own body, disconnected from everything happening around me. I approached the receptionist's desk, my voice trembling as I asked for my son. "My son, Ethan, he's in critical condition." "Where is he? What happened?" The receptionist looked up at me, her face a mask of professionalism, but I could see the slight sympathy in her eyes. She directed me to another area of the hospital, but even as she spoke, I felt like I wasn't really listening. I just needed to get to him, needed to see him, needed to know he was still alive. The rest of the world didn't matter. My only concern was him. When they finally led me to his room, the sight of him lying there, so still and broken, sent a wave of cold terror through me. His face was bruised and swollen, his leg in a cast, his eyes closed, as if he was lost in some kind of dark, silent world. My heart ached as I looked at him. This wasn't how things were supposed to be. My son was supposed to be safe, happy, healthy, not in a hospital bed with tubes and wires connected to his body. I could feel the tears welling up in my eyes, but I forced them back. I had to be strong for him. I sat down beside him, not knowing what to do or say. I just wanted him to wake up, to tell me everything was fine. that he was okay. But I knew that wasn't going to happen, at least not yet. I wasn't prepared for what would come next, not in a million years. It wasn't long before he stirred, his eyes fluttering open. I could see the confusion in his gaze, the pain. He looked at me for a moment, and then he spoke. His voice was weak, trembling, but the words that came out were like a knife to my chest. "Dad," he whispered, his voice breaking, I saw Mom with her boss, in your bedroom. They were doing things. I tried to stop them, but his security guards, they attacked me. They broke my leg, they hurt me." The words didn't make sense at first. It felt like the world had stopped. My mind was trying to process what he had just said, but it wasn't coming together. My son had seen what his mother, with her boss, in our bedroom. The same bedroom that had always been a sanctuary for us, a place where I thought we were safe. My heart sank, and a sick, icy feeling spread through me. Betrayal, anger, confusion, and disbelief all crashed over me at once. I couldn't wrap my head around it. How could she? How could my wife, the woman I trusted, do something like this? The anger was bubbling up inside me, mixing with the shock and hurt. I wanted to scream, to shout, to demand answers, but I had to stay calm. For him, he needed me. I reached for his hand, my own shaking. "Ethan, I'm so sorry. You're going to be okay. I'm here. I'll take care of you." But deep down, I knew things would never be the same again. Something in me had been broken, shattered beyond repair. I had been betrayed, not just by my wife, but by the man who was supposed to be a figure of respect in our lives. This wasn't just about an affair. It was about my family being torn apart in a way that I couldn't even begin to process. As I sat there, staring at my son, I realized that I had to do something. I couldn't just let this go. Not when my son had been hurt. Not when everything I thought I knew had been completely destroyed. I sat there in the hospital room staring at my son as his words echoed in my mind, each syllable a fresh wound cutting deeper into me. He had seen something no child should ever have to witness. He had walked into our home, into what should have been a sanctuary, and instead found chaos and betrayal waiting for him. My wife, his mother, with another man. Not just any man, but her boss. It was a scene so incomprehensible, so revolting, that my mind struggled to accept it. Yet there it was, plain as day, spoken from the lips of my son, who had no reason to lie and every reason to wish it weren't true. My stomach churned, a sick mix of anger, disbelief, and helplessness. I wanted to scream, to yell at the universe for allowing this to happen. But all I could do was sit there, frozen in my chair, my hands gripping the armrest so tightly that my knuckles turned white. My son lay in front of me, his leg broken, his body bruised, all because he had tried to defend me. He had tried to protect my honor, to stand up for what was right in a situation where I wasn't even there to defend myself. And for that, he had been attacked. Beaten by the security guards of the man who had the audacity to defile my home and my marriage. I couldn't wrap my head around it. How could my wife, the woman I had trusted with my heart, my life, my family, do something so heinous? I thought back to all the moments we had shared, the promises we had made to each other, the good times, the struggles, the dreams we had built together. Was it all a lie? Was I just a placeholder in her life until something or someone better came along? My chest tightened as the weight of her betrayal settled in. It wasn't just me she had betrayed. It was us. Our family. Our son. The image of her boss loomed large in my mind. A man I barely knew but now despised with every fiber of my being. I pictured him in my bedroom, on my bed, the place where my wife and I were supposed to share our most intimate moments. The thought was sickening. It was like an invasion, a desecration of everything sacred in my life. And my son had seen it. He had walked in on something no child should ever have to see, and instead of fleeing or breaking down, he had stood his ground. He had tried to confront them, to throw the man out of our house. The courage it must have taken for him to do that, it broke my heart and filled me with pride all at once. But that pride was overshadowed by the guilt. Guilt that he had to go through this alone. Guilt that I wasn't there to stop it. And then there was the rage, the pure, unfiltered rage that boiled inside me like a volcano ready to erupt. My wife's betrayal was one thing, but the fact that her boss had brought security guards into my home, into my private space, and allowed them to attack my son, it was unforgivable. Who did he think he was? Some untouchable man who could do whatever he wanted without consequence. The audacity, the sheer arrogance of it was enough to make my blood boil. My son was in the hospital because of him, because of them, because of their selfish, disgusting actions. And they were still out there, still in my home, carrying on as if nothing had happened. I looked at my son, his face pale and his breathing shallow, and I felt an overwhelming surge of anger mixed with sadness. He was so brave, so much stronger than anyone should have to be at his age. He didn't deserve this. None of us did. And yet here we were, picking up the pieces of a life that had been shattered in an instant. And I couldn't help but think about how it all came to this. Were there signs I had missed? Red flags I had ignored? I replayed moments in my mind, searching for any clue, any indication that my wife had been unfaithful. But nothing stood out. She had been distant at times, sure, but I had chalked it up to the stresses of everyday life. Work, parenting, bills. It was easy to grow apart a little when life got overwhelming, but never in my wildest dreams did I think she would do something like this. To cheat on me, to bring another man into our home, into our bed. The betrayal cut deeper than I thought was possible. And yet, as much as I hated her in that moment, I couldn't stop thinking about my son. He needed me. He needed me to be strong for him, to be the parent he could rely on when everything else had fallen apart. I reached out and gently held his hand, my thumb brushing over his bruised knuckles. "I'm here," I whispered, though my voice felt hollow. "I won't let this go." He didn't respond. His eyes fluttered closed, his breathing evening out as the exhaustion overtook him. I sat there in silence, the quiet hum of the hospital monitors the only sound in the room. My mind raced with thoughts of what I would do next. I couldn't just sit here and do nothing. I couldn't let them get away with this. They'd crossed a line. No, they had obliterated it. And now, they had to face the consequences. But even as I thought about revenge, about justice, I felt the weight of the betrayal pressing down on me. This wasn't just about punishing them. It was about understanding how everything I had built could crumble so quickly, how the woman I loved could turn into a stranger overnight, how my son could be left to suffer for something he should never have had to endure. The nurse came in to check on my son, her presence pulling me out of my thoughts for a moment. She gave me a reassuring smile, telling me he was stable and needed rest. I nodded, but her words barely registered. My focus was elsewhere, on the pain, the anger, the betrayal, and the burning need to make things right. As the nurse left, I leaned back in my chair, my gaze fixed on my son. I had no idea what the future held, but one thing was clear: this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. My wife, her boss, those guards, they had started something they couldn't finish. And now it was my turn. My turn to protect what was left of my family, to fight for the dignity they had tried to strip away from us. My son would heal, physically at least, but the scars of what he had witnessed, of what had happened, would take much longer to fade. I knew that. And as much as I wished I could turn back time and undo all of this, I couldn't. All I could do was move forward, one step at a time, and make sure that no one ever dared to hurt us like this again. Leaving the hospital was like stepping into a different world. The sterile, quiet halls of the ER were replaced by the cold night air and the distant hum of traffic. My mind was a whirlwind of emotions: anger, disbelief, and a simmering rage that refused to be tamed. I had spent hours by my son's side, watching him drift in and out of sleep, his body broken and battered because of what had unfolded in my home. And the more I watched, the more I slowly became infatuated with the women and boys who had repelled me in my home. That thought alone was enough to ignite the fury burning within me. I clenched my fist as I walked to my car, the image of my son lying helpless in that hospital bed fresh in my mind. Every step felt heavy, like the weight of the betrayal had manifested physically, pressing down on me. As much as I hated leaving him, I knew I couldn't sit idly by. I couldn't just wait for the situation to resolve itself, because it wouldn't. Not this time. What had happened wasn't a mistake or a misunderstanding. It was a deliberate, vile act that had torn my family apart and left my son in critical condition. I had to act. As I gripped the steering wheel and started the engine, my thoughts were consumed by what I would find when I returned home. Were they still there? Did they think they had gotten away with it? The image of her boss lounging arrogantly in my house filled me with disgust. He had no right to step foot in my home, let alone desecrate it. And my wife, the woman I had trusted with everything, had invited him in, had let him claim a space that was supposed to belong to us. The drive back felt like an eternity. My mind replayed my son's words over and over, the pain in his voice cutting through me like a knife. They're still at home. The idea that those people, the ones who had hurt my son, were still under my roof made my blood boil. I didn't care about their excuses or justifications. There was no justification for what they had done. They had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, and now it was my turn to set things right. I knew that there was my turn to set things right. As I approached the house, my grip on the steering wheel tightened. The lights were still on, illuminating the windows like a beacon of betrayal. My stomach churned at the sight. I had spent years making that house a home, pouring my time, energy, and love into it. It was supposed to be a place of safety and comfort, not a stage for deceit and destruction. And yet here I was, pulling into the driveway with the knowledge that everything I had built had been tainted beyond repair. I turned off the engine and sat in silence for a moment, the weight of what I was about to face settling over me. My hands trembled as I reached for the door handle, but it wasn't fear that caused it. It was the sheer intensity of my anger. I had never felt anything like this before. This overwhelming need to confront, to demand answers, to make them pay for what they had done. But beneath the anger was the hurt, the deep, raw pain of betrayal that I couldn't push aside, no matter how hard I tried. Stepping out of the car, I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. My heart was pounding in my chest, each beat a reminder of the storm brewing inside me. I walked up the path to the front door, my steps deliberate and measured. The closer I got, the louder the sounds from inside became. Laughter, music, the kind of carefree noise that had no place in this moment, in this house. I stood at the door for a moment, my hand hovering over the handle. My mind raced with questions. Did they even care about what they had done? About the damage they had caused? About the boy lying in a hospital bed because of their actions? The thought that they might not, that they might be carrying on as if nothing had happened made my blood run cold. With a deep breath, I pushed the door open. The scene that greeted me was worse than I had imagined. There they were, sitting in my living room as if they owned the place. My wife, the woman I had devoted my life to, was perched on the couch next to her boss, her expression calm and unbothered. And him. He sat there with an air of smug confidence, a glass of whiskey in his hand like he belonged there. The sight of him, so comfortable in my home, made my stomach turn. For a moment they didn't notice me. The sound of their laughter filled the room, echoing in my ears like a cruel mockery of everything I had lost. When they finally looked up and saw me standing there, the room went silent. My wife's expression shifted. A flicker of something, guilt, maybe, crossing her face before it was replaced by a neutral mask. Her boss, on the other hand, didn't seem fazed at all. If anything, he looked amused. The sight of them, so nonchalant in the face of what they had done, was the final straw. My hands clenched into fists at my sides, my entire body trembling with the effort to contain the rage boiling inside me. This was my house, my family, my life, and they had trampled all over it like it meant nothing. I stepped forward, my voice low and steady despite the storm raging inside me. The words came out without hesitation, each one laced with the weight of my fury. Get out. They didn't move. My wife glanced at her boss as if waiting for him to decide what to do. He smirked, taking a sip of his drink before leaning back casually. "This isn't your house anymore," he said, his tone dripping with arrogance. "She invited me here." Those words hit me like a slap in the face. Not my house anymore. The audacity of it was almost too much to bear. My chest tightened as I fought to keep my composure, the urge to lash out threatening to consume me. But I couldn't let them win. Not like this. I took another step forward, my voice rising as I repeated the command. I said, "Get out." This time, there was no mistaking the anger in my tone. It was a warning, a final chance for them to leave before things escalated. But instead of leaving, the boss motioned toward the doorway, and two men stepped into the room. Security guards, the same ones who had attacked my son. Seeing them again brought a fresh wave of fury crashing over me. These were the men who had broken my son's leg, who had hurt him so badly that he ended up in the hospital. And now they were standing in my house, acting as if they had every right to be there. My fists clenched tighter, my nails digging into my palms as I stared them down. The boss leaned forward, his smirk never wavering. "You should leave," he said, his tone calm but threatening. "This is her house now." Those words hung in the air, heavy with implication. My wife didn't say anything, her silence speaking volumes. She had made her choice, and it wasn't me. It wasn't us. It was him, and in that moment, something inside me snapped. There was no going back now. The moment those words left his mouth, I felt my blood turn to fire. Her house. Her house now. The arrogance it took to make such a claim in my presence, in my home, was staggering. The reality of what I was facing settled in with a weight so heavy, it felt like it could crush me. My wife, the woman I had trusted, loved, and built a life with, had not only betrayed me but had aligned herself with this man in such a brazen and shameless way that it left no doubt in my mind where her loyalties lay. She had made her choice, and it wasn't us. It wasn't our family or the life we had built together. It was him. I could feel the rage bubbling under my skin, every muscle in my body tense as I stared at them. Her boss still sat there with that smug grin on his face, as if he believed he was untouchable. The two guards stood by the doorway, their stances relaxed yet ready, as if daring me to make a move. And my wife, she sat there silently, not a shred of remorse or regret visible on her face. Her silence spoke louder than any words ever could. She wasn't going to stop this. She wasn't going to fix this. In fact, she had no intention of doing anything at all. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. But the fury inside me was like a tidal wave threatening to drown me. My mind raced, replaying everything that had led to this moment. My son, lying in a hospital bed, his leg broken and his spirit crushed. The betrayal, the lies, the audacity of these people sitting in my home, as if they had done nothing wrong. Every second I stood there, the anger grew, feeding off the injustice of it all. I scanned the room, taking in every detail. The furniture I had worked so hard to afford. The photos on the walls, memories of a family that now felt like a cruel joke. Everything in this house was a part of the life I had built, the life I had believed in, and now it was being treated like a disposable backdrop for their selfish actions. My fists clenched at my sides, the tension in my body reaching a breaking point. The boss leaned back in his seat, his smirk never faltering. "I think it's time for you to go," he said, his tone calm and condescending. This situation doesn't concern you anymore. Those words hit me like a slap in the face. How dare he? How dare he act as though he had any authority in my home, over my life? My vision blurred with anger and I felt my control slipping. I had spent years trying to do the right thing, to be a good husband, a good father, a good man. And this was the result? This was my reward for trusting, for believing, for loving? Hey, I took a step forward, my voice low and steady despite the storm raging inside me. You have no idea who you're dealing with, I said, my tone filled with barely restrained fury. The guards stepped forward, positioning themselves between me and the boss. They were big, muscular men, clearly trained for intimidation. But in that moment, I didn't care. My anger was a force of its own, overriding any sense of self-preservation. These were the men who had attacked my son, who had caused him so much pain and suffering. They were complicit in everything that had happened, and the sight of them standing there, unbothered, was enough to push me over the edge. One of them smirked, as if amused by my defiance. You should leave, he said, his tone mocking. Didn't move. My entire body was tense. My fists clenched so tightly that my nails dug into my palms. The room felt suffocating, the air thick with tension. I was outnumbered, outpowered, and out of my depth, but I refused to back down. This was my house, my life, my family they had destroyed. I wasn't going to let them walk away unscathed. I wasn't going to let them walk away unscathed. I locked eyes with the boss, my gaze filled with the fury I felt. You think this is over, I said, my voice trembling with emotion. You think you can just do this and walk away. His smirk widened, his confidence unshaken. It's already over, he said simply. The arrogance in his voice, the absolute certainty that he had won, was the final straw. Without thinking, I lunged forward, the pent-up rage and frustration exploding out of me in an instant. The guards moved quickly, intercepting me before I could reach him. They grabbed me, their grip like iron, and shoved me backward. I stumbled, my back hitting the wall, but the pain barely registered. All I could see was red. Absolute red. All I could see was red. The boss stood up, adjusting his tie as if this were nothing more than a minor inconvenience. You're making this harder on yourself, he said, his tone almost bored. Just walk away. Walk away. How could he even suggest that? How could I walk away from everything I had lost, from everything they had stolen from me? The audacity of his words fueled my rage, and I pushed off the wall, ready to charge again. But the guards were faster. They blocked my path, their expressions cold and unyielding. One of them shoved me again, harder this time, and I fell to the ground. The impact knocked the wind out of me, but I refused to stay down. I scrambled to my feet, my body aching but my determination unshaken. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about my son, about the life they had torn apart. I couldn't let them win, but as I stood there, battered and outnumbered, I realized something. They weren't going to leave. They weren't going to stop. No amount of yelling or fighting was going to make them see the damage they had caused, the pain they had inflicted. They didn't care. To them, I was nothing more than an obstacle, a nuisance to be brushed aside. I looked at my wife, praying for some sign of remorse, some flicker of regret, but she wouldn't meet my eyes. She stared at the floor, her expression blank, her silence deafening. She had made her choice, and it wasn't me. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. This wasn't a battle I could win. Not here. Not like this. They had already taken so much from me, and if I kept pushing, I risked losing even more. My son needed me. He needed me alive, not beaten and broken by these men. I took a step back, my chest heaving as I tried to catch my breath. The guards didn't move, their eyes fixed on me, ready to strike if I tried anything else. The boss sat back down, his smirk firmly in place, as if he knew he had won. And my wife? She stayed silent, her betrayal cutting deeper than any physical blow ever could. Without another word, I turned and walked out the door. The cold night air hit me like a slap in the face, a harsh reminder of the reality I was now living in. As I stood on the porch, the weight of everything crashed down on me. My marriage, my home, my family, it was all gone, destroyed by the very people I had trusted most. But as much as it hurt, I knew one thing for certain. This wasn't the end. I would find a way to make things right, to protect what little I had left. They might have won this battle, but the war was far from over. As I walked away from my home, the cold air biting at my skin, a fire burned within me, the kind of fire that couldn't be extinguished by time or reason, the kind of fire fueled by betrayal, injustice, and an overwhelming need to reclaim what had been taken from me. My mind raced with 1,000 thoughts, each one sharper and more urgent than the last. I had left my son in a hospital bed, broken and bruised because of the actions of those people, and now I was walking away from my own home, forced out by their audacity and cruelty. Every step I took felt heavier than the last, the weight of my emotions pressing down on me. I couldn't get their faces out of my head, the smug grin of her boss, the cold indifference of his guards, and worst of all, the silent, complicit expression on my wife's face. The woman I had once loved more than anything had become a stranger, someone capable of standing by while my family was torn apart. It was a betrayal so deep, so profound, that it left me reeling. But even through the haze of anger and hurt, one thought stood out above all the rest. I wasn't done. Not by a long shot. They had taken everything from me. My trust, my peace, my family. But they hadn't broken me. Not yet. There was still a part of me that refused to give up, that refused to let them win. They might have pushed me out of my home, but this was far from over. I wasn't going to let them walk away from this unscathed. I climbed into my car, my hands gripping the steering wheel tightly as I tried to steady my breathing. The cold leather felt harsh against my skin, a stark contrast to the heat of the rage simmering inside me. I sat there for a moment staring at the house I had worked so hard to build, now filled with people who had no right to build there. The lights were still on, casting a warm glow against the dark night. But there was nothing warm about what was happening inside. It was a mockery of everything that house had once stood for. As I sat there, I thought about my son. The look on his face when he told me what had happened, the pain in his voice, the fear in his eyes. He had tried to protect what was left of our family, to stand up against the people who had invaded our lives, and he had paid the price for it. The memory of him lying in that hospital bed was like a knife to the heart, a constant reminder of why I couldn't let this go. I owed it to him to make things right, to show him that we didn't have to accept this, that we didn't have to let them win. I started the car, the engine roaring to life as I gripped the wheel tightly. I didn't have a plan yet, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to sit back and do nothing. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about justice, about standing up for myself and my son, about reclaiming the life they had tried to steal from us. The thought of them sitting in my house, laughing and carrying on as if they had won, was unbearable. They thought they were untouchable, that they could do whatever they wanted without consequence. But they were wrong. I drove aimlessly for a while, my mind racing as I tried to figure out my next move. Every option seemed risky, every plan filled with potential pitfalls. But I couldn't let that stop me. I had to act, and I had to act soon. The longer they stayed in that house, the more it felt like they were solidifying their claim over it, over my life. I couldn't let that happen. As I drove, I thought about everything I had done to build that life, the long hours at work, the sacrifices I had made, the love and effort I had poured into my marriage and my family, and now it was all gone, destroyed by greed, betrayal, and deceit. The thought was almost too much to bear, but it also fueled my resolve. I wasn't going to let them take it all away from me, not without a fight. The night stretched on, the streets empty and quiet as I continued driving. My mind kept circling back to the same questions. How could she do this? How could she stand by and watch as our lives were torn apart? I had trusted her, believed in her, and she had thrown it all away. For what? For him? For a man who had no respect for me, for our family, or for anything we had built together. The betrayal cut deeper than I had thought possible, but it also gave me clarity. I couldn't change what had happened, couldn't undo the damage they had caused, but I could control what happened next. I could take back my power, my dignity, and my life. They thought they had won, but they had underestimated me. They didn't know what I was capable of, how far I was willing to go to protect what was mine. As the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, I found myself parked outside the hospital once again. I needed to see my son to remind myself of why I was doing this. He was the only thing that mattered now, the only reason I hadn't completely lost myself in the chaos. Seeing him lying there, vulnerable and hurt, reignited the fire inside me. I couldn't let him down. I couldn't let them win. I sat by his bedside for a while, watching him sleep. His face was pale, his breathing steady but shallow. The cast on his leg was a stark reminder of what they had done to him, of the violence and cruelty they had brought into our lives. I reached out and gently placed a hand on his, my heart aching at the sight of him like this. He deserved better. We both did. As I sat there, a plan began to form in my mind. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't without risks, but it was something. I couldn't confront them head on, not with their resources and connections, but I could outsmart them, use their arrogance against them. They thought they were untouchable, but everyone had weaknesses, and I was determined to find theirs. I left the hospital with a renewed sense of purpose, the beginnings of a plan taking shape in my mind. I didn't know how long it would take or how much I would have to sacrifice, but I was ready. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about justice, about standing up for what was right and reclaiming what they had tried to steal from me. As I drove away, the fire inside me burned brighter than ever. They thought they had broken me, but they had only made me stronger. This wasn't the end of the story, it was just the beginning. And I was ready to write the next chapter.